Hi everyone, this is Matisse, and so I'll get started right away. The major difference that we can see right away with 12 is that the workspace is now dark, so you have the possibility to have either the white or light or dark interface that you had previously or this one. We have changed a lot of things on many fronts about the software, and there's been like icon changes. There's been a lot of changes in the workflow as well, all of it to make your process better and faster. So let's start by talking a bit about art. When you create a drawing now, you have the ability to create either vector or bitmap art. And you have the ability as well to, as you can see, combine vector and bitmap art together. So let's explore that a little bit. Now that I'm on my bitmap layer, or the art layer basically, I have access to my bitmap brush properties. And so in 11, what we did is that we had released the bitmap brushes. In 12, we've improved the way that they work by a lot. And so let me just make that bigger. The bitmap brush will basically allow you to create artwork that you would usually create maybe in Photoshop. It will give you that smooth feel and opacity changes with the pressure. As you can see, have a couple different tips that come available with the software already. Another thing you can notice is that we have the dual tip function, just like Photoshop does. So you'll be also able to import your favorite brushes that you use in Photoshop or other softwares directly into Harmony. So you'll also be able to add a lot of randomness and customize your brushes in order to have them create exactly the type of artwork that you want. This could result in something like this. So what's useful about the fact that you can use bitmap and vector artwork together is that you can really combine them to give to use the best of them, of both worlds. So you'll be able, for example, to have some basic color fills done in vector. You could even use a gradient at that point, but then you're also able to add maybe some texture that you would not be able to add maybe on a vector using a vector brush, but then you would create that special brush effect or traditional effect using the bitmap brushes. Now, talking about brushes, if we go back to our little artwork here, just going to go on another art layer and talk about the pencil line. And so let's just make it bigger again. Well, the bitmap brushes are not the only ones that allow you to have texture on them. So now you're also able to have texture directly on a vector line. So once again, we provide you with a couple different textures by default from the software. And again, you're also able to import brushes that you'd like from Photoshop, for example, into Harmony to use that. Of course, if you can imagine the possibility that this gives you, basically it gives you still have the same flexibility of tools and ease of use that you have when you work with vector, meaning that you can very easily customize the artwork that you have created, change its pattern or things like that. But on top of that, you're also able to have more of an artistic look to it, or at least a different medium. So with that said, the textures will also follow whatever you do with the thick and thin of the line. Now, in terms of animation, we've done quite a bit, and so there's a lot that I'm going to show through the node view, the camera view, and the timeline, because a lot of things have been updated. So let's start with paperless a little bit. and we'll discuss what we've done here. So, all right. Okay, so I have the start of a scene here. Okay, so there's quite a bit of things that are going on here. In terms of animation strictly, with paperless animation, what we've done is that we made it possible for you to mark drawings. So something that animators know and use a lot is the organization of animation. And so to organize their animation and to plan it, they'll have key poses, they'll have breakdown poses, and they'll have in-betweens. Well, this is all good to know and use, but it's harder to see visually when you do not have something that allows you to mark it, for example. And so I'm saying mark because basically that's what we have, that's what we've called this feature. So basically what you're able to do is take a drawing and mark it as a key, a breakdown, and in between, and I'll talk about this a little bit. Once you mark drawings as such, you'll see that there is a little red square that appears on top of the drawing itself. That's because I've marked it as a key. So if I am to mark it as an in-between, you see that the marking disappears. Basically, the in-betweens do not have any marking. With that said, so I can just scroll through my animation, or as I go and create my animation, and I can mark ahead of time the drawings as I create them. Something that is also very handy with this feature is to combine it with the flipping toolbar. And so what if, for example, in this animation I have all of my drawings completed, but maybe for some reason I want to go back and have a look at if my animation makes sense just in terms of like the keys and the breakdowns poses, or some poses specifically. Well, with the flip toolbar, I can decide that I will flip only through my keys and breakdown. And so now using my F and G shortcut only brings me to those drawings marked as such. Of course, if I remove the breakdown, I'll only scroll through the keys. So that's very, very handy. What you can also notice in terms of the timeline, oh, and maybe I should add that those markings also show up in the XG. Now, if we go back to the timeline, you can also see that there's other things that look like they're marked. Like you can see there's colors here. So what we allow you to do as well is, for a better organization method, we allow you to now color a layer. And so you can basically assign a color to it so that you can easily find the layer that you're looking for in the timeline. So you can have your own color codes. It's not the only thing that can get colored or marked with a color. This color will also show up in the node, as you can see. But you could also decide to mark some part of your scene. So let's say that, for example, between frame 20 and 30, maybe what I know is that my character is going to be doing a walk cycle. I could decide to mark it as such, pick a color, say walk cycle, and then here you can see that this region is now marked, and if I let my cursor on it, I'll see what has been assigned to it. Something else that has changed in the way that we handle the drawings is the exposure. And so now you're able to have an exposure even when you're showing the same drawing twice. So the same drawing number 1 is showed here, and then it's still drawing number 1, but I've been able to still have a new exposure set for that recurrent drawing number 1 exposition. This is useful because you could decide that, okay, I'm going to put drawing number 1 here, and it might be more applicable in a cutout workflow. But I might decide, okay, I'm going to have drawing number 1 here, and at the moment I do not have drawing number 2, or I don't want to draw it, so I'll re-expose drawing number 1 here, but then change to drawing number 3 later. What this does is after that, I'm able to go back to the exposition that maybe I would have wanted to change and change it already, and it will keep the same. It won't affect first the drawing number 1 that was exposed for this amount of frame, and then here it will keep the amount of exposure that it was set previously. When you have a lot of layers and things going on in your scene, you have a big timeline. And so we've also made it possible for you to very quickly solo things out. So there is a solo button here that you can click on in order to focus solely on one aspect of your scene, for example, the backgrounds or the animation or things like that. So that's recommended for use. Another thing that I'm going to talk about, and this time I will bring in a cutout character. Alright, so another thing that we'll be able to do, for example, let's create a keyframe here. And interpolation. Alright, so what we're able to do now is assign automatically an ease to your animation. So before, you'd have to click on the keyframe, go into set ease for multiple parameters, and assign some kind of ease here, hit apply. Now you're able to click on a keyframe and assign an ease from here directly. So you have a couple different eases that are done by default. And so this also allows you to select an unlimited amount of keyframes and apply that specific ease to all of them. Okay, so this brings me to cutout animation. And we've done a couple things in terms of we've created new tools that you can use to animate with. We've also modified our deformers quite a bit. And so before I go into the deformers, I just want to show you something that we call the mesh warp. All right. So let's remove this. What is the mesh warp? In this example, I'm using the mesh warp on the second map here that shows through the magnifying glass in order to create a feeling of a fisheye. So let's just show you what a mesh warp is really. I'm just going to copy this. All right. So the mesh warp is an effect that you're able to set. It's basically a grid that is made out of a couple of points. You can control the amount of points that the grid has. But then the interesting thing is that when you move those points, as you can see, it will modify the look of the asset that's under it. So I can set a specific deformation to my mesh warp and then move the mesh warp around in order to have that effect be applied to whatever layer that's under it. What I did for my fisheye is basically I made a mesh warp that only had 4 corners, and then I pulled to create that bubbly look. And so this acts kind of like a peg, meaning that it is a node that can receive keyframes, so keyframes of positions or of movement as well of the specific points that it's made out of, and then you can interpolate between those 2 points, so those keyframes. Now this brings me to talk about deformers, and so there's quite a bit to say about this. Let's bring in an example. All right, so I have a couple of deformers on this character here, and I'm just going to go to one of them in the node view. So as you hear me talk, you can also hear that I'm referring to what was called the network as a node view. So we've made our terminology a bit more precise. So these modules are now called nodes. And so this is a node view. And then as you can see, instead of the module library, we have the node library. And I'll talk about this window a little bit later because it's been modified as well. Now, if you remember what you used to have when you were creating a deformer with a previous version, is that you'd have an offset, you'd have, and for example, that's a bone, but you'd have an offset, the root, you'd have the bone, the articulation, a lot of different nodes that were getting created as you were generating your deformer, and that created even more things to go into and modify the properties of to adjust whatever you wanted to. So we've simplified that. There's way less nodes that get created. The creation of a deformer is also easier. For example, just going to create one real quick. Okay. So if we look at our deformation toolbar, we see that there's new icons, but there's also less icons. For example, when I create one deformer, I will click on the rigging tool, but it's also the tool that you use to modify it. So you no longer have two different tools to click on to create it and then set it up differently. It's all the same one. So right now, right away, I can fool around with my deformer, but if I want to set it up differently later, I can then just go back on the same tool and change it. So this is pretty much more. It's easier to use. It's easier to teach to other people. And we also made it possible. We changed the way that you will create different deformation chains. So what am I talking about with deformation chains? I don't know if all of you used deformers this way before, but sometimes in animation, you want, for example, this is a leg. You want your leg to be animated from the top to the bottom. And some other times, you want that same leg to be animated from bottom to top. Before, you'd have to create this new drawing and call it, for example, 1 plus 1. We've modified that. And so we've even modified the fact that you need a new deformer as soon as you change the drawing. So to just demonstrate that, I'll go on the next frame of my drawing, and you can see that my deformer that I had created on drawing 1 is still showing up. This means that I can apply the same deformer on any other drawing, and that I can basically have some kind of animation going on with my deformer here, and it will affect any drawing that's exposed during this deformation. Now what happens if you want to have a new drawing but also a new deformation chain, well, there's a button for that. So you'll create a new deformation chain, and then this will enable you to create your chain that will go from up to down, from bottom up basically. And you'll be able to switch from the deformation chain that you're using throughout the animation. So you can see it goes back here. In terms of the deformation chain, how will you play with it? In the transformation switch, basically what this is so for example, my first deformation that I created is transformation 1. This might be confusing if I have like 10 different deformers, so I might also want to rename it. So maybe I'll call this one top down and this one bottom up. Now here you can see the changes already, the names are showing up. And those numbers here allow me to, they're the names of the drawings basically, and they allow me to assign more drawings to the same deformers. So maybe I'm going to create another drawing number 3, and I want to assign it to the deformer chain that goes from top to down. And so any animation that's been done to it will also be affecting this new drawing. All right. We've also created a new kind of deformer actually that is very useful and that more and more people in studios are using. And so this is called the envelope deformer. As you can see, it wraps itself around a shape. Of course, I've wrapped it around my pelvis myself. And so what it allows me to do, it's basically the same functions as a curve. So each point is independent from another. The major difference from a curve is that the offset is controlled just like any other control point. So it's considered the same way. And so it allows me to completely reshape an asset. Of course, it creates a key. And to later on modify it again. And you can see that you can have a lot of flexibility in terms of how you can reshape the whole drawing and interpolate that. So a lot of people are using this on bodies or on pieces. In my case, I've used it on this piece because of the design of it. So if we go back to the deformer by default, we can see that if I was to move my legs, for example, this would be in the way. And so I wanted to not have to redraw too much. So instead I just use this deformer on it. Now let's have a look at a character that is also using the envelope deformer in a very overall way, meaning that every single part of this cutout character has been created using the envelope tool, envelope deformation. And you've probably seen him around as it is one of our major characters that we're using at this point. So our little Toon animation. Okay. All right. So what is so special about the envelope deformer? Because it wraps itself around the shape, it gives you so much more freedom than a deformer usually would. It gives you as much freedom as you'd have if you were drawing paperless, because you're basically able to reshape completely an asset, but it gives you on top of that the power of cutout animation, which is the ability of the software to generate interpolation for you so that you don't have to draw the in-betweens. Mixing that together creates animation that will basically look like it's very much like paperless animation or traditional animation. So you'll be able to push your animation quality even further with that tool. And something else that this gives you access to is the ability to create one rig for all your views. So I don't know if you notice here, but my character, for example, his face changes angle and is very smooth in doing so. Well, it's because the face is made up of a lot of different parts, but mainly it's made up of only one drawing per part for most of them. And so what's going on here is they all have an envelope deformer around them, and it's by reshaping this envelope deformer that we achieve a new view. So you'd be able to create your profile, your quarter front, quarter back, and even more views now because you're able to in between those different views that you create. So this gives you less rigidity that you'd usually have or is more present in a cutout world. And what you'll see here is that, as I mentioned, the character goes around and does a full 360. And as you can see, there's only one drawing in the jacket, but it's the same parts that are moving around and playing with the existence of our 3D space within the software. What you can also see, a quick pointer, is that we have 3D objects. This is not necessarily new, but we also handle new 3D formats, which are Collada and Alembic. So those formats are now, it's possible for you to import them inside the software. Now, if we just stay on this scene for a little bit, there's something else that I want to show you, and it's about effects. And so a lot of productions will have highlights and tones on the characters or on the assets. And highlights and tones are pretty fun. They really push the look of your show or your project. But they're also a lot of work because, well, you have to draw the zone that will get the highlight or the tone. And as soon as there's a change in the animation, those are also extra drawings that you'll have to modify and adjust. Of course, there are ways using like a node system to have the shadows and highlights areas kind of get generated by themselves, but it still gives you some limitation and as a result that might not be completely adequate. So if we look at our animation here, we can see that there is highlights and tones, but basically what is special about them is that they haven't been drawn at all. There's no section on the character that has been drawn in order to generate those. So what we did is that we basically make it possible for you to create geometric or volumes out of your 2D assets. And so we allow you to give an elevation, a bevel size, and all kind of different properties that you're able to modify in order for your 2D assets to have this little bump to them. As you can see, the whole character has it. It is something that you set up once at the end of your rig, and it's going to be there and follow your character adequately. And then the way that you generate those highlights and tones is basically with a light source. So the nodes that create those shadows and highlights are shaders. So you have a light shader or a tone shader, depending if you want highlights or tones. These have various properties that you're also able to play with. So you could have a very crisp look to your tones, for example. And of course, just like most of our effects, you're able to change the color of what is generated. So that doesn't change, it's still there. But what's really interesting is that you're able to change the position of the light source and therefore impact where the tones and highlights get generated on the character. So right now I'm only modifying the light position for the tones, but you can see how it impacts the character. And it's all based, of course, on the volumetric that you have created beforehand. Okay, this brings me to more effects, but also to the changes that we've done in the node view. And so we created something that's called backdrops. And so, for example, we know that more and more studios are doing more and more complex characters, and who says more complex characters also says more nodes, a lot more nodes. And so when you're dealing with that type of rig, well, it's harder to really, organize them properly and to find your where, for example, your arm is. Well, the backdrop is very easy to create. So you'll be able to just select a node and go into the insert menu and insert a backdrop to it. This you can then assign a color to, name it so that the name shows up here. And then what's very useful about it is that instead of having to select everything within the backdrop, I just select the backdrop itself in order to move it, reposition it, or change things. We've done a lot of improvement as well with the way to organize nodes. And so, for example, we know that a lot of studios or individuals will modify the properties that they have of their nodes. Now, sometimes you want to modify your properties after you've done your whole rig because you forgot to do something beforehand. And then you realize you'll have to go into every single node to modify that same property. So that can be a bit tiring. Instead, what we did is that we created a button called Set Properties on Many Layers, and you'll be able to modify a couple different properties for those specific nodes. So most of the time we have a lot of things going on with the animation tool, with the ability to have the 3D pad, the way that the interpolation is getting created, and how we deal with the pivot points, right? So you'll be able to modify all of that there. Then another thing we've done is we realized that by creating new effects, they often have multiple ports, so it can be a bit confusing to know what does what and what it's for. So now when you click on a port, you actually have the name of whatever should be connected to that port. So that helps a lot to understand what is expected of you. We also have more effects, so the light shading isn't the only effect that we have. Let's talk about the node library. So we've reorganized this window. Now the menus are here on the left side, and we also included a search bar. So when you are in the search bar, because we have so many effects, it's easier for you to kind of just type in something and find it here. As soon as you remove anything from the search bar, you have access to the full FX again. Now, something else that we did is we opened up the doors to OpenFX FX, basically, so plugins. And so what are OpenFX? It's basically FX that are created by a third party. These effects can be sold or downloadable for free. But basically, what I've seen from the OpenFX is a lot of effects that will look like motion graphic effects, or things that people would like to do with After Effects, for example. So the reason why we've opened doors to those OpenFX is to allow you to have a more consolidated workflow so that you can stay in harmony and add those kind of effects and still manipulate all of them through here, so it's easier for you for the process, the compositing, and all that. Something that we've also added, for example, if I just go in my render view, let's just check this. Okay. So you can see that I have my effect that's been generated here. Of course, when I'm in my OpenGL view, I don't see it, but we created something called render preview. That is a node that allows you to, as you can see here, it loads up the frames. So it renders out, it soft renders out an effect for me so that I can see it in my OpenGL view and even play it back. So that's extremely useful. So you don't have to do a soft render export of your animation to make sure that it fits with your scene. You can just use this render preview node. All right. Okay, let's talk about games. So it is possible for you to create animation that you're going to send to a game engine, for example, Unity. And so there's a couple things that we did for that. Let me just set my scene right. Okay, so I have a little idle animation here. Now, what are the things that we've made possible for you to do? Well, we've created a script that will export to sprite sheets. So when you click on the export, it will basically export your animation, create many sprite sheets at once. So you can create as many sprite sheets with different resolutions as you please. Those come by default, but you can just add an unlimited amount of other resolutions that you want to create. You'll click on export. What this is going to do is generate sprite sheets, but also some XML file that is then used to read your animation and put all of the parts together back into Unity or your game engine of choice. We've chosen to work with Unity first because it is a very broadly used game engine. But as soon as you have someone who understands coding, they will be able to take our XML file and extract the data that they need to make it fit with the game engine that you're using. So once in Unity, we have the Harmony SDK. So basically, you'll go on the asset store of Unity, you'll look for Harmony, and you'll download and import the free package for Harmony. Once this is done, you'll have access to the animations that you've exported. So you can see my little animation here. I have access to all of my animations. In this case, for this character, I only have two, I mean. You can also see we've made some demonstrations for you. So you can see that you're going to be able to extract the location of a precise point from Harmony, like the gun tip, in order to use this location to have Unity generate things from it. You'll be able to light up your scene and your 2D assets with Unity. So as you can see, this affects how dark or light my character is, but also the shadow here. And you can see that the shadows are also going to be applied to every 3D object. And the link between Harmony and Unity is very strong, meaning that if I realize in Unity that the color of my shirt, for example, doesn't match much the background, I can go quickly in my Harmony scene, change the color of the shirt, and redo the export. So one click again. And then in Unity, all I have to do is to reload my scene. So it's basically about, re-clicking here, playing it, and the changes would appear. We've also maximize the performances. So as you saw, I showed a couple new effects that are pretty heavy to run, but we've also made it way easier for your computer to run them. So our performances offer you a lower amount of time when you render out assets or scenes, as well as a quicker importing time when you import something, an asset from the library to your scene. So even if your rig is really, really heavy, it will not take up too much time to import it inside. Back to the game engine a little bit. The game export will handle game bones. So when I didn't talk about that in the deformer section, but we have a couple different deformers, as you know. So we have bones, curves, envelopes, and we also have this thing called game bone. The game bone is exactly like the bone, but you have to use this one instead of the bone when you are creating assets for Unity or for a game, because Unity will read properly all of the animation that you do with this game bone. And so the animation is going to look the same in Harmony as it will in Unity, which is exactly what you want. You'll also be able to export cutters. So the rigs that you will create for a game are going to be much simpler, but we keep adding nodes that are being read by Unity. So now we have cutters, whether they are straight or inverted, and transparency nodes as well. So other effects would have to either be baked in Harmony into like an image instead of an effect, and then get sent out to Unity. So doing the same type of export, or generated directly in Unity. All right, so I'm now open for questions.
Thank you, Matisse. That was really great and really helpful. There's a lot of great things covered. We have a few questions, so I'm going to start with Chris Forney. Hope I pronounced that correctly. He has 3 questions, so I'll start with the first one. And the first one says, can preset eases be set with custom values?
Not from what I know.
Okay, we can look into that. We can have our development team look into that and get back to you with a full answer, but doesn't seem to be.
Yeah, what I know is that you're able, let's say that I'm not using these presets, and that I've made my own, out of this little window. I can also copy it and apply the same ease here by using this button that is in your customize.
Good. The next question he has is, can the mesh wraps point be controlled with pegs individually?
The mesh warp can be controlled by a peg on top of the mesh warp, yes. The pegs would not be able to control a specific point of the mesh warp, so that's what the mesh warp is for, right? So if you you could create a mesh warp that you'll only move one point of, so that's something that you can do.
Good. Next question he has is, can a deformation control point be controlled with pegs directly?
You can have a peg, just like the mesh warp, you can have a peg on top of the deformer that you'll be able to use to do your skewing or things like that. But a point of a deformer will be controlled directly through the deformation point, right?
Okay, so next question. So Chris, I hope that answers your questions. If you have more questions, you can always email webinars@toonboom.com and we can get back to you as well. So the next question comes from Thomas. Thomas asks, how would one go about wrapping 3D objects around a 2D character using a spine? like you have the main characters doing, such that the 3D parts move with it and rotate properly.
Right. Okay. So basically, just like you create a hierarchy, you would do that with your 3D asset. So let's say I do not have like a 3D asset per se, so I'll have to go back in my scene. But you can have a peg that will get, let's say you have a gun, a 2D gun, and you have a 3D bullet. You can have a peg on top of your gun and another peg on top of your that peg as well that will also control the bullet. So whenever you move the peg that controls both, they of course will both move. Now in terms of rotation, while you get that the 2D asset cannot rotate and not look flat unless it's using an ortholock on it, um, but you will be able to, on your 3D asset, control it and rotate it with the 3D tools.
Good. So the next question, so Melissa, I hope that answers, no, was that Thomas? So we're going to move on to the next one. So Melissa's got a question. Any chance we'll get more colors for the backdrops? So like the way we can use the color picker and choose your own colors rather than drop-down menu.
That would have to be discussed with the R&D department.
Right. So we could do that. Melissa, if you send in your comment and your question and your suggestion, we'd be happy to pass that on to the R&D department, and we'll see what happens. Thank you. Next question comes from Dawn. Dawn asks, does Harmony have any small preview to see what each effect does?
No. No, we don't.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next question. I believe the name is Ederson. I hope I said that correctly. So Ederson says, hello. Is it possible to animate a wave using bones and apply a different ease for each of the bones to make it look organic?
Yes, it's possible. Basically, inside a deformer, what you'll see is when you create a deformation, basically, you'll have, I'll draw this pretty quick. Okay. If I'm moving this one and this one and this one, they all have keyframes, right? They're all separate entities. And so I'm able, after that, to set a specific ease to this one and then another one to the other control.
Good. So the next question comes from Dawn. Dawn asks, where can I get the OpenFX plugin for Harmony?
Right. So Harmony or Toon Boom as a company, we do not have or offer OpenFX. OpenFX plugins are created by companies that are outside of Toon Boom, and so there's a lot of companies that do it that you can find online. The package that I had was from GenArts. So we also have a list of OpenFX companies, so we could provide you with that list.
Yeah, so you can just email us and we'll send you that list. We'll put you in touch with our product manager who can provide you all that information. Next question comes from Kent. Kent asks, are there plans for Harmony to have 3D integration with any other packages other than Maya?
No plans that I can really talk of.
Exactly. So there are things in development. Within the next year, there should be some new releases, and you just have to stay tuned at that point. But if you have any suggestions, Kent, you're more than welcome to email us, and we can pass them on. Okay, here's a tough name to pronounce. Yuzel, I hope. I'm sorry if I got that wrong. And the question is it possible to create a key facial expression key facial expressions that are then animated like in 3D character animation?
Yes, it's possible. So, especially if you work with deformers. Let's say that your whole face has deformers all over. Of course, when you create a happy expression, all of this is keyed. So you're able to then copy that major key or the group of keys and apply it to this character in another scene, or later in the scene, you're able to store it in your library and then bring it back in any time you need to.
That's good. Don asks, can the tone shader be animated using a peg?
Yeah, yes, the position of the light source can be animated, can have a peg on top of it, but the light source itself moves and acts as a peg.
Cool. Next question. Just wondering, this comes from Colin Bennett. So Colin asks, oh, I think I know Colin. Hi, Colin. Just wondering why one wouldn't use any bones all the time, game bones all the time. What does the regular bone do that the game bones do not?
Okay, so there's no difference between the two. The only difference comes when you export it to a game engine.
Mm-hmm.
So the game engine will not read the bone properly, it will read the game bone properly.
Okay, cool. Don has another question. So his question is, where do you make notations on the timeline and nodes in the node view?
Sorry, can you repeat that? How can I make notation?
Yeah.
Like this little thing here, the scene marker.
Uh-huh.
You basically highlight a couple frames, right click, and say create scene marker.
Good. And how do you do that for the nodes in the node view?
Okay, so the nodes basically, if I go in my properties, automatically this white box, I can click on it. It's like a color box. And doing it through here or doing it through the timeline has the same effect.
Okay, good. Okay, here's another question. Is there any way to set the individual radius of each point in the envelope deformer, like you can with bone deformers?
If I remember correctly, it is possible. It's not something that I've played much with, but if you want more information about that, it would be better to contact us by email so that we can direct you to the proper information.
Good. What happens, Thomas has a question, what progress has been made on support on non-Maya renderers? Again, that's not a question we can answer. We can put you in touch with the support team and the R&D team, and they'll be able to answer you.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay, there's a longer question here. I'm not sure if we have much time to really answer it, but I'll try to get through it.
Sure.
About the wave, I have difficult animating it in Harmony 10.3 using bones and curves. The middle point of the deformer always looks very strange. Can you show more of how it works on parative? I'm not sure. Like
On practice.
yeah, tentacle.
I think this is an issue that has been fixed actually.
Okay. So maybe he could just get the patch for it.
Well, yeah, just the update will basically fix it for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So Don is just asking for the list of OpenFX. That's not a problem. We'll get that to you. Just email us your contact info, and we'll answer that question. So I think we're almost out of time at this point. So I would just like to share some information. The webinar it has been taped, and we'll get it up on our website at toonboom/webinars. either Friday, which is tomorrow, or Monday at the latest. So this is recorded, and you'll be able to come back to it. There's going to be more webinars coming up. There will not be one next week, but there are more coming the week after and up until December. The next one that is scheduled for September 21st, I believe, is on advanced features in Harmony, and that will be given by our Chief Technical Officer, and his name is Francisco. So Francisco will be showing you advanced features. So if you're interested in that, we'll be sending that as send out for that webinar as well. If there's any other questions, feel free to email us again, and we'll answer them one by one within the next 24 hours. And thanks again, Matisse. You're always great at this stuff.
My pleasure.
Good, thank you.
All right, have a good day.